Okay, awesome. So we should be live now. Welcome everyone to the Young and Powerful panel for QPOC Fest. So now there are supposed to be two authors here. I'm supposed to be joined by Akemi Bowman and Julian Randall, but Julian hasn't showed up yet. But hopefully, if he does, we'll just add him in as the conversation goes on, but we didn't want to hold things up too long. So, welcome. Thank you for coming. And also, Akemi's not feeling well as well. So, that's why she is off camera. So, hopefully, that's okay. We're happy to have her participate that way. So, that is where we're starting out from this panel. But, anyways, my name is Adri. My pronouns are they, them. I am a queer, trans, non binary, Mexican American reader, book reviewer, occasional writer, content creator, YouTuber, all that good stuff. So that's where I'm coming at from in this conversation. And for now, I'm excited to be joined by Akemi Dawn Bowman, who is an author of young adult fiction, middle grade fiction, a lot of things. I will let Akemi introduce herself in her own words. So Akemi, tell us a little bit about yourself, whatever you want to share, what you write, especially in the middle grade space, because that's what we're here to focus on today. So whatever you want to share.
Yeah, thanks. My name is Akemi Dawn Bowman. I write mostly YA books that include Starfish, Summerbird Blue, Harley in the Sky, and the Infinity Court series, which is a sci-fi. And then my middle grade, I've written Generation Misfits and most recently Where the Lost Ones Go, which I think is what we're going to be talking about today. And I'm super excited to be here, so thank you.
Yeah, of course. So since we have a little bit more time, for anyone who doesn't know, do you want to give a brief rundown of like where the Lost Ones Go, what it's about, kind of where you were coming at it from?
Yeah. So Where the Lost Ones Go is it's middle grade, and it's about a girl named Elliot who moves to a new town, and she's recently lost her grandmother who she was really close to, and she sort of has this obsession with tracking down ghosts and trying to prove that they're real because she thinks it's the way that she can kind of reconnect with her grandmother who had dementia before she passed. And in this new neighborhood, she kind of accidentally stumbles upon a house that she believes is haunted. And I don't want to spoil too much, but it leads to an adventure of her trying to prove this theory that she has, that if she can find the ghost and find a way back to her grandma, then everything will be okay.
Yes. I read it recently, obviously in preparation for this, and I highly, highly recommend it for anyone watching who hasn't read it yet. It's beautiful. It's very obviously deals a lot with like grief and loss, which maybe we'll get into a little bit later. So it's very beautiful, very thoughtful, a really interesting take on sort of the paranormal genre in the middle grade space that I really appreciate. I'm glad it exists. So
Thank you so much.
yeah, it was great. I had a fun time reading it. So to start off, since we're talking about Where the Lost Ones Go, what was the initial inspiration for your story and how did it evolve as you were writing? I think as I read the acknowledgments in your book, I think I remember you saying that you had an interesting inspiration for this story. So I'm curious about what it is.
Well, full disclosure, I can't remember what I wrote in my acknowledgement, so I'm not sure what's in there.
So fair, so fair.
Yeah. I think the root of it is that my grandpa has dementia. It actually runs in my family very deeply. And so it's something that I kind of think about, like, when you get kind of thinking about life and mortality and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And, I kind of thought, like, how would I sort of process this in the future? And all these kind of different big questions, I guess, that are kind of heavy. And so it started out as a bit of a love letter to my grandpa, but it kind of quickly evolved. And I think one of the other reasons too is that at the time I had written most of my young adult books are quite heavy. And so I kind of went into this one thinking I wanted something a little bit lighter and a little bit more like paranormal, a bit of mystery. And it kind of ended up sort of getting a little bit heavy, I think, as I started writing. I was determined to not write a book that would like make anybody cry. And then this is the first book that ever made me cry while I wrote it, which was really weird. So it probably speaks to my maybe mental state at the time. But yeah, a love letter to my grandpa is probably the root of it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I also connect with that as well because I also have experience with grandparents who have dementia. So it's a very near and dear place to my heart. So I think I connected with it on that level as well. And I think a lot of young readers as well probably have that experience with their grandparents since it is sadly very common. So I'm glad that you were exploring that and sort of put a paranormal mystery adventure twist on it while still sort of honoring how difficult that situation can be as well. So thank you for sharing that. I appreciate the vulnerability.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. Also, as we mentioned before, you write for a bunch of different audiences. You've done YA, you've done middle grade, lower children's books as well. So So what has writing for different audiences or different mediums sort of taught you as a writer, and how do you bring that into your middle grade work?
That's a good question. I think, to be honest, whenever I sit down to like write a book, I don't necessarily think like, oh, this is the age group that I'm writing towards, and try to like steer away. I don't know, and I'm not saying that it's not a one size fits all. So if other authors do that, that's
Right.
totally fine too. But for me, I sort of just write it as, I guess, what does the character need? So whatever their age is, like I kind of think of myself as that age at the time, and like what did I need to hear? What would have helped me? Deal with anything heavy or questions that I was asking or trying to work through things. And I sort of just think about like where I was at that time in my life and what I could have used, and what book would have, if I picked it up off a shelf, would have really helped me and kind of spoke to my soul. And so that's kind of how I get into like writing each different age group and genre. So
Yeah, that makes sense. Like writing the stories you wish you needed, or maybe you still need. So
yeah,
that's a good
exactly.
perspective. Yeah. So kind of related to that, I think all stories are striving to maybe answer some kind of internal or unspoken question that we have about the world or maybe about ourselves. So what question do you think you were attempting to, if not answer, at least explore in either of your middle grade stories, or specifically Where the Lost Ones Go?
So for Generation Misfits, I think that one was a lot about found family. The main character in that one, her name's Millie, and she was homeschooled her whole life and really wants to go to a public school and kind of make friends. And I think she has this vision of being accepted by people who really understand her, because she feels like her parents sort of aren't on the same page as her most of the time. So that one was really about kind of finding your place in the world and finding people who make you feel, understood and seen, and all the stuff that really makes a difference. For Where the Lost Ones Go, it was a little bit different. I think there is still that aspect of finding like a friendship that somebody who really understands you and sees you. But I think this one was a lot too about working through grief. I think was really one of the core things of like these questions of like when somebody dies, where do they go? If you have unfinished business that you never got to say the things you wanted to say while they were here, and I think that stuff can be very heavy. And I think I wanted to sort of navigate that in a way that wasn't too heavy, and I think that's where the paranormal element kind of comes into play, because it is tapping into, like a fantastical kind of situation, but while still exploring that sort of grief and that journey of grief and how it's different for everybody. So.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's one of the most effective parts of the story, I think, because like you said, it's kind of giving younger audiences like an adventure to sort of cling on to, like almost a quest, like I have to collect or find these certain things, but at the same time, while the characters are navigating that quest, they're also navigating their emotions as well. So yeah, that makes sense. I think that makes sense how you structured that out.
Yeah.
So switching gears a little bit, I think there are many skeptics of the middle grade demographic who might incorrectly, I would say, argue that you could take any middle grade story concept and just write them for older audiences. So why do you think that your middle grade stories resonate more as middle grade stories? And what about those concepts do you think are best suited for young readers?
I think I probably tapped into this a little bit with the other answer with saying, like I write for, I guess, where I was at that age. So I do think that that's a big part of it. I also feel, and this isn't, again, not necessarily one size fits all, but in my experience, I kind of feel like adult fiction tends to have more, I don't want to say unapologetic, but you're allowed to be very freely messy, you know what I mean? And nobody really, it's sort of expected as like, you don't really need to, I guess, explain it the same way, or you don't carry it with the same kind of gentleness necessarily. Not that you can't do that, but I think in general. And for middle grade, for me, I think that you have just a bit more care, like you're sort of carrying that story with just a little bit extra gentleness, you know what I mean? To try to like bring that into the world in a way that speaks to kids, but also isn't like, I don't know, like not too aggressive, but you know what I mean? It's rooted into a real place that they can understand and feel safe while still tiptoeing out of the lines of, ordinary or anything like that. So if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. So when you were, I guess, conceptualizing Where the Lost Ones Go, did you always knew it was a middle grade story, like right away?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, right from the start.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think about I also dabble in a little bit of writing. I think that's how I approach it too. Like whatever it is, it is. I don't necessarily think,
Oh, cool.
who is this for? Mostly it's for me. So it doesn't matter.
Yeah, I know that sounds like such a selfish thing sometimes when people say it, but it's true. I think that sometimes like I'm the same way. Like when I write a book, it's what I needed at different points in my life, and not necessarily because I think it's hard if you're writing for an audience. You can never write a perfect book that's going to suit every single experience and every single person.
Right.
And I kind of, in my experience, when you write something that's personal to you, it reaches the people that like really hits that kind of emotional specific connection, and that can be really special too. So
yeah, I think that's why I always say that, especially for middle grade. I think, well, there's obviously in the book community, that's where I'm coming at it from, because that's the main circles I dabble in, as there's obviously a lot of adults, because children generally are not on the internet. I think there's a lot of people who maybe devalue young adult or middle grade, and say that like adults shouldn't read it, or maybe it's like only for a very niche audience, that sort of thing. But I feel like yes, it is for younger audiences. It's maybe for children, but it's also, I think, for your inner child as well. I think there's something a lot of older readers can get out of it, maybe as a sort of retroactive healing. I think that's something that middle grade can offer too, that it doesn't get enough credit for. So
yeah, that's a really nice way to put it. Yeah, I agree.
That's my tangent. So as we have talked about in previous questions, obviously Where the Lost Ones Go touches on complex topics, which again we've mentioned before. So, otherness, loss, grief, intergenerational strife, familial problems, that kind of stuff. So how do you approach making those topics like accessible and readable for young readers so that they can meaningfully engage with them where they're at as young readers?
Yes, so I think this kind of comes hand in hand with writing the book that you needed as a kid, because I think you approach it as a way that like what spoke to me, that might speak to somebody else. Yeah, it's tough. I try to think of it as like the character comes first. So who are they as a person? What are they going through in their life? Like what is the goal of the book, that they're learning something or moving through something, and kind of focus it that way. So it feels more natural and rooted in real life. Because that's the books that I like to read, is something where you can like really, it's that complex kind of, you're juggling a lot. And I know that sometimes it can be a lot, but most people have more things going on, behind the scenes. Like you don't always know what people are going through. It's that saying. And so there is people who are going through, family stuff or grief or things at school and whatever, and to try to balance that in a way that feels like a very real person. Because I'm a character driven writer first, I think.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's usually always the focus for me.
So I'm curious, like, especially when you're writing middle grade, how do you get into like that mindset of someone who's like much, much younger? Do you like connect it like to where you were in your childhood, or like do you have a method of like getting that sort of childlike voice?
Yeah, I wish I had like a cooler answer for this, because honestly, I think I just I don't want to say it was like a happy accident, but I think my intention when I started writing middle grade was to write in third person, because I thought that would separate my YA from my middle grade. And so that was the intention all along. And with Generation Misfits is written in third person. But when I started writing this one just felt, I just felt like it needed to be first. I won't spoil the reasons why, but I felt like it needed to be from Elliot's eyes, seeing the world. And I think I didn't necessarily go into it trying to change the voice that I used for YA, but maybe the subject matter kind of like shifted, and sort of like the paranormal aspect shifted. And I think I have sort of a simpler way of writing anyway, that maybe has a crossover kind of appeal for that, so that it can work in YA or middle grade. So I guess that's kind of like a cheat, but that sort of helps me, because it kind of moves in either way. But like I said, I think there's a different kind of care. I think sometimes the older you have a book, I feel like the messier they can be without you having to they don't necessarily always have to learn a lesson from it. Whereas I think sometimes when you go to a younger audience, yes, they can be messy. Of course, they're human. But sometimes you have the sort of like trying to talk it back and have like a conversation about what is that mess, you know what I mean? And how to kind of get through it, and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, that makes sense. There has to be a like a message, like a through line, something that they have to learn by the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a distinction of the middle grade. demographic. So that makes sense. So I would say queerness is very subtle in where the Lost Ones go. So what are some ways that you think you explore or express queerness in your middle grade work that is not necessarily dependent on identity or labels or even relationships?
So yeah, there's not labels in Where the Lost Ones Go, but there's two characters. Again, without spoiling anything or giving anything away, there's two characters who you have these sort of like mentions of something that took place in the past. That kind of I don't want to use the word alludes to it because it's not really. It pretty much says it. It just doesn't use a specific label.
Yeah.
And I think for me, because when I was that age, I grew up in an environment where I didn't even know labels were an option, let alone what they were. You know what I mean? It was just the sort of place that I was kind of grew up in. And so the labels for me came much, much later. What I knew first, and I think what a lot of people probably know first, is how they feel. And so that was really important to me for this character and for Generation Misfits to talk about the characters of like what they're feeling, like, if they're attracted to somebody, like what, that comes before understanding like the specific label part. And I also think that can be a nice thing too, because I think labels, I think they're very validating and I think they're great for all the people who, love them and need them. But I also think it's personal and maybe some people feel overwhelmed by exactly what to pick. I explored some of that in one of my YA books, Summerbird Blue, but it's that idea of like feeling a little bit of pressure of like, if I have to choose this, if I change my mind in 3 months or I feel a little bit different, like, does that mean that it wasn't real the whole time? And it's sort of, that kind of being able to move through something like that without picking the label, but still feeling the way you feel, if that makes sense. So.
Yeah. I think especially like what you were saying, like when I was younger, I didn't have access to the language or the labels that I do now. There was not really an awareness of that. So I think that makes sense, especially when you're writing for young readers, that maybe it's not about like this big identity moment, this big like realization. It's just like coming to terms with what it is that you feel. And maybe you don't have the words or the label for that. I think that's just as valid as people who are like, I found this label or this language or this community that I do feel very firmly rooted in. I think there's value in both of those things. So I appreciate you. Yeah. So I'm curious, what sort of stories or maybe other pieces of media or art forms kind of feed your imagination and energize you the most, especially when you're creating in the middle grade space?
I've always been really inspired by video games. I know that's because most people maybe it's more movies or other books and stuff. But mine was heavily video games. I remember playing Ocarina of Time when it first came out, and I was just the soundtrack and the storyline, and it kicked off. I think that was the first time that I had tried to write like a book. I don't remember how old I was. And it was about finding sacred stones, which was a very copycat. It was like a very Ocarina of Time thing.
Yes.
And I think that's always been the case. Like when I play like a good game, and I do like the cozy games. I don't know if you played Spiritfarer. Have you heard of Spiritfarer?
Yes, I did.
Oh my gosh, it's one of my favorites. And that like elements of grief and the music and it's just so beautiful. And it just makes me fall in love with storytelling all over again and all the different elements of storytelling. So yeah, I would say a good video game.
Yes, hard agree. Now I just want to talk about Spiritfarer, but
so
if anyone hasn't played it is so good. Yeah, it's emotional, it's beautiful. It's this lovely little indie game for anyone who's curious, where it's like the premise, if I remember correctly, it's been a while, but like the main character is like guiding the spirits of, I don't know if it's like friends or animals or something, and like doing little tasks to like help them, and you can like make a little home for them on your ship and all this. It's great. It's wonderful.
Beautiful. Yeah.
Highly recommend. So yeah.
So good.
So now I'm curious to like if there are any other video games that you've sort of like either played when you're like in the writing space, or that inspired any of your other stories.
Yeah, that's like the big one that I keep trying to find a game that's now going to top that, and I feel like it's set a standard that's almost unfair because of just all the different elements that go into it. Yeah, I mean, obviously, like Sims is a good one when you just want to not think too hard and build a nice house. I mean, I feel like that's a good one for just kind of have brainstorming. But
it's true.
Yeah.
I think this has nothing to do with anything, but I recently played like a little, I guess you could call it cozy game. Like it's called Lemon Cake, which is like where you run your own bakery. And it was extremely cute. I just love stuff like
Oh.
that. Little like that helps my brain. Little like task oriented games where it's like I have to do X, Y, and Z, and it's just satisfying because it's like I can't do
Yes.
anything in my life, but like I can make an apple crumble like in this
Yeah. No, I
Nintendo Switch
totally know what
game.
you mean. Somebody
Yeah,
said a little while ago, they're like, you realize you're only playing games that have a bunch of chores. And I was like,
pretty
but
much.
but I like it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah, I
but I
get it.
can do it there.
Yeah, you feel accomplished at the end of the day.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
I
I can
totally get
I can
it.
do interior design in Animal Crossing, but I can't do it in real life.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm switching gears, but what I can't remember off the top of my head what the comp titles were for your book, but what are the official comp titles for your middle grade projects, and which books do you wish they were actually comped to? So in other words, like what books
Mhm.
or other middle grade books do you see yours being in community with?
Yeah, so I'm actually not sure if they ever used official comp titles. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
like I don't think they did for mine. I know when I pitched it to my editor, I
Hmm.
comped it as I think it was Pan's Labyrinth meets Coraline, if I remember right.
Oh, that would
Yeah,
have been
which
effective.
yeah, yeah, right. Yeah, I think it's a little maybe less spooky. I think it's like a light
Hmm.
Pan's Labyrinth, a very light Pan's Labyrinth.
Very light, very light.
Yeah, but yeah, so I think that's what I picked, and I like that, and I also have heard it uh kind of compared to like a Studio Ghibli kind of vibe, which I
Mhm.
love that. I'm full supportive of that. So, yeah, but I still kind of stick by the Coraline Pan's Lab. I think that makes the most sense for what it is, with a bit of a contemporary twist. So,
Yeah, especially when you said Coraline, that like unlocked something in my brain because oh yeah, like she's also sort of
mhm.
traversing between two different worlds and encountering
Yes,
darkness and that kind of stuff. So that makes
yeah.
sense. Yeah, I always like to ask that question in sort of interview spaces because just for anyone listening who maybe is not as familiar with the industry, but like comp titles are it's short for like comparison. I believe if I'm
Mhm.
being correct, and it's usually like X meets X, and sort of like a way that authors pitch their work to editors and also how like marketing teams and all that pitch their books to potential consumers and readers. So it's always interesting to me to see which ones get chosen because sometimes it's mostly for a sales perspective if we're being honest, like what are two big familiar big hitting titles that we can like smash together that is going to get people excited, but sometimes it's not always accurate. So I'm always curious to
Yeah.
ask that question. So yeah, but yeah, like you said, I don't think yours had any comp titles when I went to look on like the listings or anything like that, which is interesting because they
Yeah.
don't always do it in middle grade either. So I'm
Yeah.
curious about that. So,
Do
but
you
that's
have a comp title that's like an automatic read for you? Because like when I see anything that's compared to like Sailor Moon or Anastasia, I'm like instantly like
oh
interested.
probably I haven't thought about it, but probably like Titanic.
Oh,
If
okay.
anything's
I
compared to Titanic, which I know,
I just
I
watched
know,
that the
not a
other
great
day.
week, not a great week to talk about the Titanic. But if
Oh
anything's
yeah,
come
yeah.
to the Titanic, probably just like yeah, I just haven't really thought about it, but like Gideon the Ninth is probably also something. If anything
Mhm.
of any age level was comped to Gideon the Ninth, I would read it. Yeah, like Cemetery Boys. Anyone who knows me is I'm a huge Cemetery Boys fan. So if anything, middle grader YA is comped to Cemetery Boys, I will automatically read it. So
Yeah.
but yeah, I read a lot of things though. So I'm an easy sell. So that doesn't mean that's not saying a lot.
Yeah.
So kind of wrapping up, unfortunately, since I don't think Julian is is going to show up, and obviously we would have had double the time if they had also been answering these questions, which
Yeah.
they weren't. So, but kind of looking forward ahead to the future, what sort of projects can we look forward to? Is there anything you're working on that you're excited about? I know we can't always talk about everything because publishing is a very slow game, but
Mhm.
is there anything that you can tell us about or that you're excited about working on?
Yeah, so the things that I'm allowed to talk about, I'm currently wrapping up the draft of the Infinity Courts 3, which I can't
Oh
announce
yeah.
the title yet because it hasn't been public yet. But yeah, so that's the third and final installment of the Infinity Courts trilogy. And then, yeah, the other stuff I can't really talk about. I do have, so I waited forever. I was desperate to be like writing a short story in an anthology for so long, and then I ended up getting invited to like three, and they're all coming out within like a handful of months. Boundless just came out a
Hmm.
little while ago. Being Ace is coming out in a few months, and the Star Wars anthology for Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view that also comes out this year. So yeah, and
Oh,
that's
yeah,
pretty much all.
exciting.
Yeah.
Let's see. Oh, yeah. Johnny's reminding me, if anyone in the chat would like to ask any questions, now is a great time because I've pretty much gone through the ones that I had prepared. But it's okay. I always have some off the top of my head. So if anyone would like to if anyone in the audience would like to ask a question, now is the time to do so. So my other thing is, and Johnny's also making fun of me for bringing up the Titanic. I know, but it's never too far from my mind. Also that and like Jurassic Park. I know I'm like a 90s baby. So like anyone compares anything to those, I will read them. Aladdin. Okay. I'll just stop.
Those are solid choices.
Yes. So,
yeah.
Yeah, now I'm just thinking about that. But anyways, is there anything you've read like lately from other maybe either queer middle grade or just middle grade authors that like is exciting to you or that maybe is coming up soon that you're excited about?
Oh gosh, my brain is a fog space, so like trying to remember
Okay.
it. Yeah, I mean, I know I have. I'm trying to think. I've got Ivy Aberdeen, I think is I can't remember the full title, but I've got that on my list. It's like at the top of my reading pile that I've been meaning to get to for ages. Is it so good? I knew it would be.
So
I can
good.
tell.
Yes.
Yeah.
That one, and I'm looking to the left because that's where I think it is. I guess not, but that and Ivy Aberdeen, and also her other middle grade book, Mighty St. James, I think is what it's called.
Oh yeah.
Yes, or The Mighty Heart of Sunny St. James. That sounds more correct.
Yeah, that sounds right.
They're very good. They're very, very good. Highly recommend.
Oh, that's
Ashley
good.
Herring Blake. Yeah, just like adult, middle grade. She's killing it all over the place. So yes.
Yeah.
Hard agree.
And the coolest illustrator too. Every single one of those books has like the most beautiful cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah. I know. She's very lucky.
Yeah.
Also, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, are there any children's books or middle grade books that come to your mind that sort of inspired your love for reading that maybe you unconsciously or consciously pay homage to as a middle grade writer?
I remember his Dark Materials, reading that trilogy when I was a lot younger. And if I'm being honest, I don't actually remember. I know this is terrible. I don't actually remember like the plot really, but I do remember like how much I loved those books. And part of it was because I ended up like meeting a friend through that shared love of reading, and we used to sit on the bus just reading these books like back and forth. And I remember that feeling really magical, like to be able to share a story with somebody. And I think that kind of kicked off a lot of like my desire to like write a book, to kind of have that same experience. I remember also really loving Goosebumps when I was a kid. That came out in like, I think it was like Scholastic, whatever. And Night of the Living Dummy I must have read it like 35 times when I was little. But like most of those books would also scare me. I have like a very overactive imagination. So I think that's why, even though I wanted to write about ghosts, it's very light ghosts. Like it's not jump scary because I can't handle it. I would scare myself and be lying awake at 2 a.m.
Yes, I would lose sleep over Goosebumps and like Are You Afraid of the Dark and all that kind of stuff. So I relate. I think for me, when I think about like middle grade books that like really sparked my love of reading for some reason, and this is probably niche, like maybe not a lot of people have read it. For some reason, I think of the Phantom Tollbooth by Norton Jester, which I personally think is like unmatched, like middle grade fantasy, which if anyone doesn't know what it's about, I have time to kill, so I'll just say it. But it's a middle grade fantasy story about this boy named Milo who's like super bored with life, and he one day comes home from school and there's this like magical toll booth in his room, and he's like, what's up with that? And there's a little tiny car that comes with it, and he drives through it, and he comes into this world where there's two warring kingdoms, the kingdom of words and the kingdom of numbers, and he's sort of set on this adventure to try and bring these warring kingdoms together. And it's just like full of puns, it's very literal, it's got a bunch of like turns of phrases in it, like jumping to conclusions and all that kind of stuff. Like it's great. It's just my plug for like a super old middle grade fantasy if anyone's in the market for that. But to me, that's unmatched. I'm like, if I could write something like that would be really cool. But I think Norton Jester is probably more creative than I am, so I don't think that's gonna happen. But so I don't see any questions in the chat, so we're probably gonna wrap up here. I know Julian for some reason couldn't be here today. We're very sad. I would have loved to hear his take on these sort of questions. But just to remind everyone, there is a link to the bookshop.org list for QPOC Fest that has all of the titles for all of the authors who are participating in today's events. So if you would like to check out Julian's books or Akemi's books, they are on that list, which should be somewhere in the description or somewhere else on the QPOC Fest website or anything like that. Thank you, Johnny. It's now in the chat. So, so you can look up more about Julian's books there or Akemi's books there. Highly recommend. It's a great list of books, a great lineup of authors. And I guess just out of fairness, we should probably say, if anyone doesn't know, Julian's books, middle grade books, it's a duology called Pilar Ramirez. I always struggle with that, and I'm so sorry. But and it's basically kind of like a contemporary middle grade fantasy about a young Dominican girl who is kind of one day finds this sort of magical book that transports her to this fantasy world where there's all kinds of monsters and all that kind of stuff, and she has to fight against them and fight against the prevailing trauma and legacy of Trujillo and all that kind of stuff. So it's very, very good. I've read both books. Super fast paced, super exciting. Highly recommend. Julian's an amazing author. Very excited to see what he does in the future as well. So I know he couldn't be here today to talk about them, so I thought I would just give a quick plug from the top of my head. If anyone's interested, highly recommend those. So we will wrap up there. Thank you so much, Akemi, for being here, for your time, for everything you shared. We really appreciate it. Thank you to the QPOC Fest team for organizing everything, and for all the moderators and authors who are participating in today's events. We'll just wrap up a little bit early, and maybe we can go check out that other awesome panel that's happening right now on the other stage. So thank you everyone for watching. We hope you enjoyed, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. So now I'm going to smile and wave, and hope that
Thank you so much.
Hope that Johnny takes care of ending the live show. Yay.